Hello, my name's Charlie, and I'm a grateful believer in Jesus who struggles with depression, anxiety, and using drivenness, alcohol, and other self harming means to deal with it. My life started in a rural upstate New York town in the Adirondacks. I'm the third born of 5 kids, and my parents are still married today. The year I was born, my parents bought their dream home on Lake Champlain. Um, I had a unrestricted view of the Green Mountains across the lake. It was paradise, especially for a young boy. The first memories I had were like pictures instead of videos. Not much context and brief. There are 4 of them. The first picture memory I have is my older brother chasing my older sister around on his bike in the front yard. That is the only memory, unfortunately, I have of my brother being alive. The second picture memory is from the day of my brother's murder. It's a picture of the police swarming our home and neighborhood looking for evidence. What had happened was the previous evening, my brother Andrew had gone over to the neighbor's house to have dinner, and he never came home. What we would later come to find out is Andrew and Michael, another boy, went out into the woods, walking the dogs across the street from our homes. Michael brought a hunting knife with him, and for reasons we still don't completely understand, he stabbed Andrew many, many times and field dressed him like a deer, leaving him for dead. My brother was only 10 and Michael 13. My third picture memory is being at the funeral home. And I was looking at my brother in his open casket, unsure if he was really dead because he looked, just like he was sleeping. That was just 9 days before my 4th birthday. This 4th memory took place in my boyhood hangout. It was the attic place above our 3rd-car garage. I was in a fetal position. It was the only memory I had where it was in the 3rd person, meaning I saw myself. The following year, the year following my brother's murder was most uncertain and traumatic. For reasons we still don't understand, the judge allowed Michael out on bail, living free and clear 2 doors down from our home. He was free to roam our neighborhood. He broke into our home numerous times just to terrorize us. One time, smashing a picture of Andrew on the floor. For an entire year, we all feared for our lives. While the rest of the family grew outwardly angry, depressed, and withdrawn, I grew up defiant, steadfast, and out. As soon as Michael was convicted and sent off to serve a life sentence, I went looking for work. I went to our next door neighbor and asked him for a job. He said I was much too young at 5 years old, but if I came back the next year, he'd give me a job. So, and assuming, of course, that I would forget. So the following spring, I did just that. He told me I was too young, but I reminded him that the previous year he made a promise. So we started a working relationship, and that would last until I would leave for college. In 2nd grade, I knew my mom would homeschool me if I got failing grades. So I did just that. And sure enough, she began to homeschool me in 3rd grade. I did that so I could go off and work more. You see, I would get my schoolwork done in a couple hours and then go off to work for the rest of the day. By the time I was 7, I had other jobs and businesses and filed my first tax return. From the outside, it appeared to my parents that I was doing really well, and I had been unaffected by Andrew's tragic death. However, Inside, I was dying a slow and quiet death of depression and anxiety. My parents had us very active in a church. Every time the doors were open, we were there. Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, Friday night, and many times in between. So I was a disciplined kid from all appearances. One would think that I knew God personally and had a strong faith in Him. I memorized much of the Bible. I went to Christian camps. I was baptized. I rededicated my life to Jesus several times, and even went to a Christian college. I had everyone fooled, including myself. But I was still searching for internal peace and comfort. College didn't do much for me. As soon as I broke up with a serious girlfriend, I dropped out. I didn't see the point when I could be out, working and making money. Something I had become very confident in my ability to do. I go on to make a big move to Texas, which would prove to be a game changer in my relationship with God. Just before I moved to Texas, my uncle gave me some advice. He said, in order to meet a good girl in Texas, or a good Texas girl, I needed two things. I needed cowboy boots and I needed a Bible. He said he couldn't help me out with a Bible, but he gave me his old boots he had when he had done some time in Houston years prior. I tried the boots on for a time, bar hopping every weekend. After a while, with no luck, I decided to give the Bible thing a try. Since I had left for college from home, I had also left the church and honestly hadn't missed it a bit. However, earnestly seeking a good girlfriend, it was apparently enough to get me interested in church again. So I found a good little church that a friend had told me about. Friend of a friend, actually. The first Sunday there was a prophet prophesying over people. And I was skeptical, but judging from people's reaction, it really looked like this person was reading their mail. I had learned from childhood in Sunday school that God was no longer active in our lives and had ceased intervening and speaking into our lives after the first century church. I thought to myself, though, that perhaps I had put God in a box. So it was enough for me to be curious and stick around. A few months later, a couple guys from church came over to our place after Sunday brunch. They started to share their testimony and witness to my roommates. I began to quickly judge them. You see, while I had given up the bar scene, they had continued the party life. And I was thinking to myself, these guys really need Jesus. It was at that very moment I heard a voice, and it said something like, "Charlie, this is Jesus. You've never known me, but I want to know you and have a relationship with you. And if you just accept me as your Savior." And I exclaimed in that moment, like, did you guys hear that? It sounded like an audible voice in the room. It really did. And they looked at me confused, and I told them what I had heard, and they both looked at each other like amazed. Needless to say, that day I accepted Jesus as my Savior, and everything began to immediately change. Now that Jesus and I had a relationship, I had a conscience. I could no longer drink excessively, look at porn, and do other self-harming things without dealing with a deep conviction. But I could not stop myself from doing these things. However, from the outside, I looked like I was doing just fine, just like my childhood. I was good at it again. In fact, even fooling myself again. So I had lost my ability, I had not lost my ability to earn a good living. And I used that to provide for myself and shortly for my new wife and family. Soon after the day of my salvation, I became self-sufficient again. While having a deep faith in Jesus for salvation, I still felt like everything else in this life was up to me and me alone to provide for myself. It wouldn't be until 9 years later, after my salvation, that I would have another second encounter with Jesus. I was on a Christian retreat up in the mountains of Colorado. One evening, the leader of the retreat spoke about agreements that we have made in our lives, that some of these agreements we live by are from God and some are not. There are lies that are actually implanted by the enemy that we accept as being true. So after praying and meditating for a while, nothing significant came to mind. Afterwards, the leader stuck around to answer questions and sign some books. I was standing in a line, 12 people deep, 12 men deep, when out of nowhere, I felt like I was in an out-of-body experience. I was no longer in the conference. I was standing in my attic as a 30-year-old man, and I was standing over my 4-year-old self, curled up in a fetal position. I immediately recognized it as being one of those earliest memories, the fourth memory. I felt the presence of someone else with me, and upon glancing over my right shoulder, there was a man there, and I immediately knew it was Jesus. And he said to me, "I want you to hear something." And immediately I heard my 4-year-old self say, "My parents and God don't have what it takes to protect or provide for me. So it's up to me now. It's up to me. It's all up to me." At that moment, I snapped out of the attic, and I was once again back in the present moment, standing on the stage. The line of 12 men had disappeared just that quickly. And I was standing directly in front of our host, weeping like I've never wept before. So much so that there were tears on the floor and my shirt had begun to soak itself. At that moment, his eyes caught mine, and I have no other way to say it, but I just saw Jesus in his soul. I knew Jesus was there with me and that this was something special, although I didn't know for what reason yet. Fast forward 2 years, doubt had begun to creep in about the experience and what I had heard in the vision. I didn't have any context for what I heard myself say, what it really meant, or if it was really Jesus, why he'd go out of his way to show me what he showed me. I decided to tell my mom what had happened in hopes that somehow it would resonate with her and she could offer me some kind of explanation. When I told her, a light bulb went off inside of her, and she said, "It all makes sense now." She told me that for weeks after Andrew's murder, I would come up to her and Dad asking when Michael was going to come kill the rest of us. Keep in mind, I was 4 years old. So she was to try her best to reassure me that Dad and God would never let that happen. But after a few weeks of hearing this, I finally retorted and I said, if Dad and God let it happen to Andrew, how would they be able to prevent it from happening to me? She remembered the air being sucked out of the room, and she had nothing to say. In a moment, it all made sense. My drivenness to work from an early age, my self-harming behaviors, including abusing alcohol, addiction to porn, and other self-harming means to soothe myself. The awareness was all, well and fine, but how do I resolve setting myself free from this false agreement? So that started a subsequent 8-year pursuit to find that answer. That question in and of itself, how do I set myself free from the burden of this agreement, set me up for failure from the start. All the answers I sought from church teachings, self-help books, seminars, Christian retreats, therapists, counselors, psychologists, psychiatrists, countless friends, both young and old, gave me many, many answers, but all of them returned void. I could not break the hold of chronic depression and anxiety. In fact, the hold on me grew tighter and tighter until hopelessness became a constant friend. All this while I was pushing relationships out of my life, out of frustration for not helping me, grow out of this hopelessness. I went from being able to pose as a carefree, funny, and responsible colleague, friend, husband, father, to being emotionally unstable and unpredictable even to myself. One of my bottoms was becoming suicidal after my wife and I separated for the first time. That landed me in the mental health hospital against my will. They gave me a diagnosis that didn't resonate with me very well and medication that just didn't help. Over the next 2 years, I grew more and more frustrated and angry and more desperate to find peace and wellness. Finally, at the end of my rope, and out of desperation, I decided it would be best to push the closest people out of my life, including my wife and family. I'd come to the conclusion that I needed to either live alone or stop the hurt or start all over. After separating from my wife, she more or less gave me an ultimatum that I go to Celebrate Recovery in order to see my daughters. I obliged, as I figured the ends justified the means. I just couldn't bring myself to walk away from my daughters. At the same time, I started drinking again after being sober for a year leading up to our separation. Along with the separation, drinking, and pursuing a legal divorce, my friends started to change. And I began hanging out with fewer of my old Christian friends and making new friends who had been divorced. And they could all identify with a broken marriage and encourage me to continue pursuing a divorce. My disdain and suspicion for my wife continued to grow. She was very hesitant to give me time with our daughters. The combination of suspicion and concern for my daughter's well-being finally came to a head, and I forcibly took them. An hour later, I came to my senses, but it was too late, and the damage was done. I was given a restraining order, and I didn't see my daughters for quite a while. When I finally did, it was only every so often and under professional supervision. I was devastated, and it seemed like the harder I tried, the worse things got. This went on for months and months. During this time, I had joined a Celebrate Recovery step study. While I was diligent to attend and do my best to participate and do the work, things were not getting any better. I didn't miss my meetings often, but when I did, I always ended up at a bar or worse. One night that I missed, I ended up at a friend's house on the lake, drinking the night away. I ended up sharing some of my heart and story with this fellow on the dock, and I soon felt very dismissed by him, and I was heartbroken. I left my boat with a bottle in hand. My sadness soon turned to anger, more like a fit of rage. And I can never remember being more angry at the world. I can remember driving the boat and blasting music late into the night. The next thing I remember is waking up the following day in jail. I was told that I'd driven my boat up up onto a golf course and that they had found me in the lake between 1 and 2 a.m. Being put in that jail cell, I've never felt more alone in my life. The helplessness, loneliness, shame of jail is something difficult to put into words. As I lay in my bunk in my striped jailhouse suit, the only thing I could think of doing is singing Amazing Grace. And as I did, I can only remember some of it. But when I got to how sweet the sounds that saved a wretch like me, I began to weep. And at that moment, a feeling of love that I've never before experienced wrapped around me like a blanket. I felt the presence of God the Father and his unconditional fatherly love for the first time. It was an unexplainable experience that at my lowest and most shameful moment of my life, I felt this. As I walked out of the jail later that day, I asked God, why did this have to happen? He responded by telling me that something had to break. And indeed, something did break in that jail cell. That false agreement that I had held for 35 years. God doesn't have what it takes, and he doesn't care to protect or provide for me. So it's all up to me. So that day, I made my first steps in recovery. I was able to admit that my life had become unmanageable, and further, I was powerless to make it any better. I mattered to God, and he had the power to change my life, and I was able to commit my life to his care and control. As I walked through the following steps, I shortly made amends with my wife. We called off the divorce, we fired our attorneys, and moved into a new home, all together. I also soon made amends with my old friends, some of my family, and business colleagues. I've since been asked to serve in CR and my church, which has humbled me and are some of the greatest honors of my life. It's been 20 months since that fateful day in prison. Since then, God's given me the grace to abstain more often than not from self-harming means, to overcome the depression and anxiety, which are no longer a constant companion. My new favorite hymn is called Great Is Thy Faithfulness. And my favorite lyrical line is morning by morning, new mercies I see. And as I continue to walk out recovery, this has been true. The more I admit that I'm powerless, he cares and has the power to help me, the more mercies I wake up to each and every day. Thank you for your time.